The flight was cruising calmly at 35,000 feet, cutting smoothly through the endless blue sky. From the windows, the world below looked peaceful, soft clouds floating like white islands, the horizon stretching endlessly in every direction. Inside the cabin, 232 passengers were settled into the quiet rhythm of a routine journey. Some were asleep, their heads resting against the window. Others were watching movies, listening to music, or chatting softly with the person beside them. For most of them, this flight was just another ordinary chapter in a busy life. No one had any reason to believe that this calm moment was about to become a fight for survival. The seatbelt sign was off. A flight attendant gently pushed a beverage cart down the aisle, smiling politely as she offered drinks. The hum of the engines was steady and reassuring, a sound so familiar that most passengers no longer noticed it. Children flipped through magazines, business travelers checked emails. A young couple laughed quietly, sharing earphones. Everything felt normal, but behind the reinforced cockpit door, something was going terribly wrong. Inside the cockpit, the two pilots, both experienced professionals with thousands of flight hours, were monitoring instruments and reviewing their flight plan. The aircraft was on autopilot, following a programmed route with precision. One pilot reached for a checklist while the other adjusted his headset. Then, without warning, the first pilot felt dizzy. At first it was subtle, a sudden wave of nausea. A tightening in the chest. He tried to speak, but his words came out slow and uneven. The second pilot turned toward him, concern flashing across his face. "Are you okay?" he asked. Before an answer could come, the first pilot slumped forward in his seat. The second pilot reacted instantly, reaching out to help, but within seconds, he too began to feel weak. His vision blurred, his hands trembled as he tried to grab the controls. Whatever was happening was fast and overwhelming. Within moments, both pilots collapsed. The cockpit, once a place of constant control and communication, fell silent except for the soft beeping of instruments and the low drone of the engines. The aircraft continued flying smoothly, unaware that the people responsible for its safety were unconscious. The plane was now flying on autopilot, and no one was in control. At first, nothing seemed different in the cabin. Autopilot kept the aircraft stable, maintaining altitude and direction exactly as programmed. To the passengers, everything still felt normal. But autopilot could only do so much. It could not make decisions in an emergency. It could not land the plane. And it could not respond if something unexpected happened. Minutes passed. In the cockpit, warning lights began to blink quietly, unnoticed. Radio calls from air traffic control went unanswered. A controller frowned at his screen, trying again to make contact. "Flight 782, do you copy?" Silence. Back in the cabin, one of the flight attendants noticed something unusual. The cockpit had been quiet for too long. Normally, there were routine updates, small instructions, or requests. But now, nothing. She picked up the intercom and pressed the button. "Captain, this is cabin crew. Please confirm status." No response. She tried again, still nothing. A knot formed in her stomach. The senior flight attendant exchanged a worried glance with her colleague. They had been trained for many emergencies, turbulence, fires, medical issues among passengers, but this situation felt different. Something wasn't right. She walked toward the cockpit door and knocked firmly. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. That's when panic began to quietly creep in. Not as screams, but as fear hiding beneath calm faces. Inside the cabin, a few passengers noticed the tension. A man across the aisle whispered, "Why are they going to the cockpit?" A woman tightened her grip on the armrest. Someone else looked around, sensing the shift in mood. The flight attendants moved quickly but carefully, trying not to alarm anyone. One of them used the emergency code to unlock the cockpit door. When the door opened, the sight inside was terrifying. Both pilots were unconscious in their seats. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. training kicked in. The flight attendants rushed forward, checking for breathing and pulse. One of them grabbed the emergency medical kit, while another attempted to contact air traffic control from the cockpit radio. "Mayday, mayday," she said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to stay calm. "We have a medical emergency. Both pilots are unresponsive." The reality hit hard. There were 232 lives on board this aircraft, and suddenly every one of them depended on what happened next. Word began to spread through the cabin, not officially, not loudly, but fear has a way of traveling fast. Passengers noticed the crew's urgency, the closed cockpit door, the sudden halt in service. A man stood up slightly, peering forward. "What's going on?" A flight attendant gently motioned for him to sit. "Please remain seated. We're handling a situation." But the cracks were showing. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs turned into anxious conversations. Phones were clutched tightly. Some passengers silently prayed. Others stared out the window, realizing just how high they were, and how fragile their safety suddenly felt. The plane continued flying forward, steady and silent, like a giant machine moving without a mind. Time was running out. Fuel calculations mattered, weather conditions mattered, communication mattered, and without conscious pilots, the margin for error was dangerously thin. The flight attendants knew one thing for certain: they needed help. And they needed it fast. No one yet knew that the answer would come from an unexpected place, from a passenger who had never imagined she would step into the cockpit that day. But at that moment, all that existed was fear, urgency, and a plane flying through the sky with no one truly at the controls. And the clock was ticking. Among the passengers seated quietly in the middle of the aircraft was a 17-year-old girl traveling with her family. She sat by the window, her forehead resting lightly against the glass, watching the clouds drift past like slow-moving waves. To everyone around her, she looked like any other teenager, headphones on, backpack at her feet, eyes calm and distant. No one knew that inside her mind lived a world of runways, cockpit instruments, and emergency checklists. For years, she had been fascinated by aviation. While other kids spent their free time on games or social media, she spent hours watching aviation documentaries, cockpit recordings, and pilot training videos. She followed channels that explained every switch, every warning light, every emergency procedure. She downloaded flight simulation software, practicing takeoffs and landings late into the night, imagining what it would feel like to sit in the left seat of a real aircraft. But imagination was one thing, reality was something else entirely. She had never flown a real plane. She had never touched an actual control column. She had never felt the weight of hundreds of lives depending on her decisions. As the aircraft continued forward, the calm hum of the engines was suddenly interrupted by subtle changes in the cabin. The usual movements of the flight attendants had stopped. Their expressions were serious. One of them spoke quietly into an intercom, her voice tense but controlled. Then came the announcement. "Attention passengers," the flight attendant said, pausing briefly, choosing her words carefully. "We are experiencing a medical emergency in the cockpit. If there is anyone on board with aviation experience, please notify a crew member immediately." The cabin froze. Passengers looked at each other, confused and uneasy. A few heads turned. Some people laughed nervously, assuming it was a misunderstanding. Others felt a sudden chill run down their spine. Aviation experience, that wasn't a normal request. The girl felt her heart skip. She removed her headphones slowly, replaying the words in her mind. Medical emergency. Cockpit aviation experience. Her parents looked at her, puzzled. Her mother whispered, "What do you think that means?" The girl swallowed hard. She knew exactly what it meant. Her thoughts raced. Both pilots, one pilot, autopilot, communications. Descent planning. Every video she had ever watched came flooding back. Every simulated emergency landing she had practiced suddenly felt terrifyingly relevant. The flight attendant walked down the aisles scanning faces. "Please," she said quietly, "if anyone can help." The girl's hands trembled. She was just 17. She wasn't a pilot. She didn't have a license. She didn't have real-world experience. But she had knowledge. And right now, knowledge might be all that stood between this plane and disaster. She took a deep breath and stood up. The movement caught attention immediately. Conversation stopped. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. She felt the weight of their stares, heavy and questioning. I might be able to help," she said. Her voice was soft at first, but steady. The flight attendant hurried over. "What experience do you have?" The girl met her eyes. "I've studied aviation for years. I understand cockpit instruments. I've trained on flight simulators. I know emergency procedures." The flight attendant hesitated for a fraction of a second. There was no time to debate. "Please come with me," she said. As the girl stepped into the aisle, her legs felt weak. Each step toward the cockpit felt heavier than the last. Her parents reached out instinctively. "Be careful," her father said quietly. She nodded, unable to speak. The cockpit door opened, revealing a scene she had only ever seen through screens. The pilots were unconscious. The seats, the controls, the glowing panels of instruments, everything was real. And everything was overwhelming. She felt her chest tighten as the gravity of the situation hit her fully. This wasn't a simulation. There was no reset button, no second chance. A flight attendant guided her forward. "We'll connect you with air traffic control," she said. "They're standing by." The girl stepped into the pilot's seat. It was larger than she expected. The controls were firm beneath her hands. The windshield stretched wide, revealing nothing but sky. She sat down slowly. Her heart was racing so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Her palms were damp. For a moment, fear threatened to take over completely. What if I fail? What if I make the wrong move? What if everyone here pays the price? She closed her eyes, just for a second. Then she did what she had practiced for years. She focused. She scanned the instrument panel, identifying the basics: altitude, airspeed, heading, autopilot status. The plane was stable, still cruising, still safe for now. "Autopilot engaged," she said aloud, more for herself than anyone else. The flight attendants exchanged hopeful glances. Her voice grew steadier with each breath. She placed her hands on the controls. For the first time in her life, she felt the true weight of an aircraft responding to her touch. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It was subtle, but it was real. The girl straightened her posture, just as she had seen pilots do. She adjusted her seat, checked her view. Every small movement felt symbolic, like stepping into a role she had been preparing for without knowing it. Outside the cockpit, the cabin was silent. Passengers held their breath. Some prayed, some cried quietly. Some simply stared at the closed door, hoping for a miracle. Inside, a 17-year-old girl sat in the pilot's seat, holding the controls of a commercial airliner with 232 lives on board. Her heart was still racing, but her mind was clear, and in that moment, she wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was the only one who could bring them home. The moment the radio crackled to life, the air inside the cockpit seemed to change. "This is air traffic control. We have you." The voice came through the headset, calm, measured, and steady, exactly what the 17-year-old girl needed to hear. It was a lifeline from the ground, connecting her to professionals who understood what was at stake. She exhaled slowly. "Yes," she replied, adjusting the headset over her ears. "I'm here." On the other end of the frequency, controllers had already cleared surrounding airspace. Radar screens glowed with her aircraft highlighted in bright color. Dozens of experts were now focused on a single mission, getting this plane safely on the ground. "You're doing great," the controller said. "We're going to take this one step at a time." The girl tightened her grip on the controls, listening carefully. "First, confirm altitude." She glanced at the instrument panel. 35,000 feet. Good. Autopilot is still engaged. Yes. Perfect. We'll use that to our advantage. Outside the cockpit, the sky remained calm and deceptively peaceful. Inside, every second felt heavy. The girl's pulse raced, but her mind remained focused, replaying procedures she had seen hundreds of times in videos, now unfolding in real life. Reduce speed gradually, the controller instructed, slow, smooth movements. She carefully adjusted the throttle, watching the airspeed indicator respond. The engine's hum changed pitch, deeper and slower. The aircraft responded gently, just as it should. Speed reducing, she said, "Excellent, begin descent to 28,000 feet." She input the new altitude into the flight management system, her fingers moving with careful precision. The nose of the plane dipped almost imperceptibly. Gravity took over. The descent had begun. Back in the cabin, passengers felt the subtle shift. Ears popped, the sense of motion changed. Some looked at each other with silent questions. Others clasped their hands together, whispering prayers under their breath. They didn't know exactly what was happening, but they knew something important had started. Inside the cockpit, warning chimes sounded briefly, then stopped. "You're doing exactly what we need," the controller reassured her. "Stay focused on your instruments." The girl nodded, even though they couldn't see her. She checked altitude, vertical speed, heading. Everything was stable. Minutes passed. Each one felt like an hour. As the plane descended through layers of cloud, visibility decreased. The bright blue sky faded into gray mist. Raindrops streaked across the windshield, blurring the world outside. "Don't worry about the weather," the controller said, reading the situation before she could ask. "We've cleared a long runway. Emergency crews are standing by." Her throat tightened. Runway, that word made everything real. Reduce speed further. The voice continued. "Begin approach configuration." She followed instructions, lowering flaps incrementally. The plane responded with a slight shudder, then steadied. The sound of airflow changed, louder now, more aggressive. Flaps set. "Good, you're on course." Her hands were steady now, not because she wasn't scared, but because fear had transformed into determination. Every movement was deliberate. Every decision mattered. The controller's voice never rushed her. "Keep the nose steady. Maintain heading. You're lined up perfectly." Through the thinning clouds, lights began to appear, runway lights. A long, glowing path stretched out below, shimmering against the dark ground like a promise. "I see the runway," she said. "That's what we want." The controller replied, "You're doing great." As the aircraft descended further, the ground rushed closer. Buildings, vehicles, and airport structures grew clearer by the second. The illusion of speed intensified. Her heart pounded, landing gear down, the controller instructed. She reached for the lever and pulled it. A heavy thump echoed through the plane as the landing gear locked into place. The sound traveled through the cabin, causing passengers to gasp and grip their seats. "This is it," someone whispered. Inside the cockpit, the girl swallowed hard. "You're committed now," the controller said gently. Focus. The plane was lower than she had ever seen in any simulation. The runway filled the windshield. Lights raced toward her. Reduce speed. She eased the throttle back again. Keep the nose steady. She adjusted slightly, fighting the instinct to overcorrect. Stay on the center line. Her breathing was shallow now, controlled but intense. The ground rushed up. Prepare for touchdown. The last few seconds stretched endlessly. Then the wheels hit the runway. A violent jolt shook the aircraft. Sparks flew from beneath the wings. The sound was deafening, rubber screaming against asphalt, metal vibrating under immense force. The cabin erupted in screams. The plane bounced once, then again. "Hold it." The controller urged, "Keep it straight." She fought the controls, correcting the drift, resisting panic. The plane threatened to veer, but she held firm. "Apply brakes, slowly." She did. The aircraft slowed, shuddering violently as it fought momentum. Smoke filled the air outside. Emergency vehicles raced alongside the runway, lights flashing red and blue. The noise was overwhelming. The fear was overwhelming, but she did not let go. Seconds felt like lifetimes. Then finally, the speed dropped. The screams faded into silence. The aircraft rolled, and then it stopped. For a moment, no one spoke. The engines powered down. The cockpit was eerily quiet. The girl's hands trembled as she released the controls. Tears filled her eyes, blurring her vision. Her entire body felt weak, like the strength had suddenly drained out of her. "We're on the ground," she whispered. On the radio, the controller's voice broke slightly with emotion. "You did it," he said. "You brought them home." In the cabin, silence shattered into cheers, sobs, and prayers of gratitude. Strangers hugged each other, people fell to their knees, some cried openly, overwhelmed by the realization that they were alive. Emergency crews surrounded the aircraft. Inside the cockpit, a 17-year-old girl sat motionless for a moment longer, staring at the runway ahead. She hadn't just landed a plane. She had faced fear at 35-0, 0 feet and 1. Silence filled the cabin, not the quiet hum of cruising flight, but a deep, heavy stillness that felt unreal. For a brief moment, no one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the passengers needed time to understand what had just happened. They were on the ground, alive, then suddenly the silence broke. A single sob echoed through the cabin. Then another and another. Cheers erupted, hands clapped, voices shook with emotion. Strangers embraced each other without hesitation. Some passengers dropped to their knees in the aisle, whispering prayers through tears. Others laughed uncontrollably, overwhelmed by relief. All 232 lives had been saved. Children cried into their parents' arms. Elderly passengers closed their eyes, hands trembling, whispering words of gratitude. People who had never spoken a word to each other moments before now hugged like family. The nightmare was over. Outside, emergency crews surrounded the aircraft. Fire trucks stood ready, lights flashing against the runway. Paramedics rushed toward the cockpit as soon as the engines powered down. Airport officials communicated urgently, but their faces showed something more than professionalism: awe. Inside the cockpit, the 17-year-old girl sat motionless. Her hands still hovered near the controls, fingers trembling slightly. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as the weight of everything she had just done crashed down on her all at once. Only now did she realize how exhausted she was physically, mentally, emotionally. The adrenaline began to fade. And with it came emotion. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she finally leaned back in the seat. She wasn't thinking about headlines. She wasn't thinking about praise. She was thinking about how close everything had come to disaster, and how somehow it hadn't happened. A flight attendant gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice breaking. The girl shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. "I just followed instructions," she said quietly, but everyone knew the truth. Following instructions at 35,000 feet, while responsible for hundreds of lives, was no small thing. As the cockpit door opened, applause thundered through the cabin. Passengers stood despite instructions, clapping through tears. Some called out thank you. Others simply cried harder, unable to find words strong enough. She stood up slowly, her legs weak. She stepped back, not toward attention but away from it. She didn't seek the spotlight. She didn't raise her hands in triumph. She quietly moved aside, allowing medical teams to reach the pilots, allowing the crew to do their jobs. That was who she was, ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. As paramedics worked urgently in the cockpit, the girl exited and returned toward the cabin. Her parents rushed to her, pulling her into a tight embrace. Her mother cried openly. Her father held her with shaking hands, unable to speak. Passengers reached out as she passed, touching her arm, her shoulder, silent gestures of gratitude. Some whispered blessings. Some simply nodded, eyes filled with respect. She lowered her head, overwhelmed by it all. Later, as the aircraft was safely secured and passengers began to disembark, the story spread quickly. Airport staff, emergency responders, air traffic controllers, everyone wanted to know the same thing. How did she do it? The answer was simple, but powerful. She stayed calm, she focused, she didn't panic. She trusted what she knew. That day, she didn't perform a miracle. She demonstrated something even more important: courage under pressure. She proved that heroism doesn't always wear a uniform. It doesn't always come with years of experience or official titles. Sometimes it comes from quiet preparation, from passion practiced in private, from knowledge gained without knowing when it would be needed. She was just a passenger until she wasn't. News outlets would later call her a hero. Social media would explode with praise. People would debate whether she should become a pilot someday. Officials would commend her composure. Experts would analyze her actions in detail, but none of that mattered to her in that moment. What mattered was this: 232 people went home to their families. 232 stories continued. 232 lives were spared, and one 17-year-old girl learned that inside her, inside anyone, there can exist strength greater than fear. That day, she didn't just land a plane. She proved that courage, focus, and calm thinking can turn an ordinary person into a hero. And long after the runway lights dimmed and the airport returned to routine, one truth remained undeniable. When everything was falling apart at 35,000 feet, she rose. Airplane